Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're located, and welcome to the second episode of the Educators AI Playbook. My name is Mark Orchison, and joining me is Dan Fitzpatrick and Julia Puddock. Guys, Happy New Year. Hope you had a good one. I know we were just speaking, Dan, it's been a sort of a busy start for you and Julia also. I suppose, what are you looking forward to in reflecting down on 2025? What were your sort of big takeaways over Christmas in terms of having some downtime and sort of thinking the year ahead about AI and all the things that have happened in 2025, about what you're sort of thinking for 2026?
Yeah. Well, we do every year as a business, we put a survey out.
Mm.
And it's the kind of joint purpose of that is it helps us design better resources, solve needs in the coming year. But it also kind of gives us that landscape view of, well, where are we with this? And for the first time ever, that survey kind of changed.
Mhm.
It pivoted a lot. So the last few years, it's kind of been the obvious stuff. We need more professional development. We need more policy, all that kind of thing. But this year, there was a real urgency within the results that we got back from hundreds of educators around the world. So this is not just specific to one region, but the main message seemed to be that there was a real urgency for permission, that people are
Mm.
almost ready to go now. People are like, right, we kind of understand this. We can see the benefits. We know the risks. Okay, we might have a kind of placeholder policy in place. A lot of schools do now. We just now need decisions to be made.
Mm.
And we need, I think the problem with that is I don't think we fully know how to make decisions around this technology yet.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's given me a focus for 2026 really, and how do we help? Because I've got a bit of background in kind of strategic decision making, so I've kind of pivoted to go right. How do we help leaders over the next year be able to make decisions? Because I don't think, and when someone becomes a leader, especially in education, I don't think anybody actually trains people in how to make decisions. So yeah, so we're gonna be focusing on that over the next 12 months.
Interesting. And Julia, we were just having a touch point. Julia runs at Nine. We do this thing called the AI and Privacy Academy, and it runs over 6 or 7 months. And the team do it. They have one cohort for Europe and everywhere else in the world, and then you have the North American one. And Julie, you're saying that between the different cohorts, like the Europeans and everyone else, the rest of the world, are ahead in some areas, but then the North American cohort are ahead and behind in others, but they're different. I'm just interested to learn a little bit more about
Yeah,
that,
I
about
think,
where they are.
yeah, when it comes to AI, it's very mixed. So we have schools on the Privacy Academy who are just starting their AI journey, and we have schools who are a little bit further on who have designated a tool. And that's what we're seeing kind of is this designation of one tool for kind of official operational use. Um, and it's a real mix. And then we've got, obviously we have people like IT directors who are really bought into AI, who know a lot about the technical background, and then we've got people who have just never used it before. So we see quite a bit of difference. And then in terms of like the privacy side of things, there are certainly some areas like things like vendor where we find our North American cohort are a little bit further ahead. And then there are more kind of very privacy specific things, like we were saying earlier, like things like records of processing that are very
Yeah.
much a requirement under laws like the GDPR, where we find the European and the Middle Eastern countries are a little bit further ahead because they have more specific laws around those things. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see the differences, certainly.
Brilliant. Now, in the last episode, we had a great guest, Patrick McGrath, who I thought was fantastic. Is like an opening for the episode. And Dan today, and we've got one of your really good friends joining us, Dr. Sabba Quidwai, on design thinking and leadership. And I think that's going to your point, Dan, around your survey. I think Sabba has some really interesting points around considering how you sort of go from this individual use to organizational strategy when it comes to AI. Before we sort of get into things, I just wanted to talk about some things about AI in the news, and you may have seen those things if you're UK based, because both of these two examples are from the UK, and I think they're quite relevant because they sort of fit in some of the themes today. Julia's talking around free versus paid AI later on in the call. Also, Dan's theme around individual use to organizational strategy in terms of decision making and responsibility. And in most of you should know this, like around Elon Musk's the Grok chatbot, that has become the sort of like center of a global scandal, where there is this viral trend where users could make requests to digitally address women children, and there are lots of sexualized imagery, and there is this whole thing with Musk going, well, it's not a problem. Of course, you can do this. We're not going to change our products. But then they sort of said, well, actually, we will change it. But if you pay for the product, if you're a paid for Grok user, then you can digitally undress women, but not for the free accounts. That I thought was, first of all, extremely bizarre and disturbing. But I suppose that is Musk. And in terms of like emphasizing his point there, then Musk retweeted or reposted. I don't know what you do with X. I'm not an X subscriber. I don't know what you do. But let's say reposted an image of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wearing a bikini, as if he, wasn't wanting to cause himself any more trouble around this disturbing trend that was taking place. And now, after many other organisations or sort of authorities were going to investigate him, he is taking a step back. The other one that I thought was really interesting was there was a major institutional failure by the West Midlands Police here in the UK, and essentially, while preparing a risk assessment for a football match, not a soccer match, if those in the US, a football match between Aston Villa and the Israeli team Maccabi Tel Aviv, police used Microsoft Copilot in their research, and through that research and using Copilot, it hallucinated and made up a football game that didn't actually occur between another team, West Ham United, and essentially in that made up football team, the football supporters from Tel Aviv apparently caused significant trouble, and that influenced the decision making process. And I think both cases really have an impact in terms of the strategic management of AI, and how you as a school leader are preparing for AI, given that you have this product, a paid for product Copilot that essentially should have the rules, the barriers around saying things that it shouldn't say, and then you have like the free paid for version that is ethically doesn't have any sorts of guide rails, and then the person who owns that product is going, well, there's nothing wrong with it. And Dan, from your end, I don't know what you really think or about either of those cases. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first instance is I was really appalled by it. Really, I don't tend to use X that much. I've kind of it's almost like a legacy account from back in the good old days of Twitter. But every now and then I'll pop on there and just scroll through, because there's some people who I followed who haven't made the leap over to LinkedIn or other platforms, so I don't get to see them anymore. And I've witnessed this firsthand. I'll not talk too much about this because I think Julia's obviously in a far better position and will have far more authority talking about essentially the abuse to women and children that is happening on that platform. But I was really appalled to see it, and to be honest, it's no surprise to me that someone like Elon Musk is nonchalant about it and doesn't really seem to care. Although I do get the impression, and from what I think Keir Starmer said yesterday in the news, that actually behind the scenes, X are working really hard to try and fix it.
Yeah,
you would hope so, but obviously, on the front of it, Elon Musk is obviously not going to show a weakness.
yeah,
Through that. The second situation, I think, to be honest, I think the use of artificial intelligence to synthesize scenarios is a really clever use of AI. but with many, many, many caveats. And obviously, if West Midlands Police were just going purely off what Copilot was telling them, and not doing what we tell our children to do and critically analyze, evaluate the sources, have more than one source, then obviously that's a huge failure and a huge failure that had real world impacts. So
Mm.
yeah, it shows you that what you're doing on with AI isn't just something that's between you and your screen. Actually, it
Mhm.
informs opinions and is easily brought into the real world.
Yeah, and from your newsletters over the past month in December, you had highlighted that there's a number of companies that had to up their game and Chat GPT for education, and I know we just touched upon Copilot there, but Copilot Teach have moved from these. I think you refer to them as novelty tools to now tools built around teacher workflow, and really for a school leader or anyone leading AI within their schools watching this, but I suppose why is it suddenly more important to be sticking to these bigger players rather than sort of the ancillary Wild West in a way? I suppose is what I would call it. That is sort of growing up around the edges.
Yeah, it's I kind of looked that statement when I said companies that had kind of come into their own and up their game in 2025 was kind of from two different points of view. So the first point of view where you got the main players, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft. I thought, and it kind of fits in with what Julie is going to be talking about really around how I think the first few years these tools were very much designed for individual use,
Mhm.
and therefore everything that comes with an individual use tool in terms of enterprise, in terms of the capabilities when you've got more than one person working on something together, data protection, all of that kind of thing. I feel like that they're now making the transition into, well, actually, how does this tool help us, this
Mhm.
specific profession in terms of
Yeah.
teaching or in terms of learning, and what features can be embedded to just help make that process a bit easier. They're not perfect, by no means are they perfect. On the flip side of that coin, the companies that are utilizing AI in their platforms that are specifically education focused, I thought 2025 was a real turning point from those companies essentially going, or let us package this in a way that will help you create a lesson plan, that will help you create a task in a nice, easy way, which I think was a really nice way to ease into the AI world in the first couple of years. I feel like some of them are actually starting to their platforms are becoming a bit more three-dimensional now, and they're
Okay.
starting to actually address real needs within the classroom, which is really nice to see. And I'm looking forward to more of that coming this year from certain companies.
Now, you also wrote about the theory of mind as a critical AI skill, and I think it'd be interesting just for you to explain a bit more about what you mean about this, but also around the collaborative ability and why that's really important for students around knowing how to write a prompt, I suppose.
Yeah, it was based on a research paper that was published in 2025, and that bit of research looked at, well, what actual skills are needed with artificial intelligence, specifically around if you're talking with an AI chatbot, how do you use this in a way that's actually impactful? And this report came out with a judgment that actually just subject knowledge is not enough.
Hmm.
And it really resonated with me. And the reason I shared it in my Forbes article was because I think a lot of our education systems are really, really heavily focused on subject content, on
Yep.
knowledge-rich content, which has its value. Of course, it does. But what this bit of research was saying was actually when you are using an AI to collaborate with, to work with, then just the skill of the subject that you're working with the AI on is not enough. There needs to be some what we might have called meta skills there as
Yep.
well. In this paper called it theory of mind, essentially, and I'll paraphrase it really fast, but essentially, have you got the skills to be able to evaluate how a conversation is progressing? Have you got the skills to be able to step back from a project and make decisions about the whole project in a bit of a unemotional way, in a bit of a way that goes, right, actually, is this helping? Is this beneficial? So it's kind of those metacognition skills that we talk about, with a bit more in there, and it's kind of termed as theory of mind. But I encourage educators, especially anyone who's trying to integrate or help their students figure out artificial intelligence. It's a great read.
I think that is really interesting for me. And one thing that's quite pertinent at the moment, we're just in the process of kicking off it's a 9-month piece of research with a lot of the primary accreditation commissions within international schools and US independent schools about how they evaluate what effective use of AI looks like. How does a school present back to an accreditation commission or for inspection about demonstrating what good use of AI looks like? So, because anyone can say, well, we use good AI effectively, but is there a model that you can refer to? And from an accreditation inspection, if you are looking at schools, and when we look at the DFE in the UK, they are asking schools to demonstrate how they manage the risks, but they're not necessarily then saying, okay, this is what we're going to look at from a pedagogy perspective. And so the bit of research we're looking at is how will accreditors and inspectors evolve their thinking when it comes to what they should be looking like. But also, interestingly, what are schools looking at? What are schools thinking they're going to be able to present in a structured way to demonstrate what they are doing with AI is effective? Not only that they're managing the risks, and they're managing the risks are the things that we always know about. So to one time, it'd be really interesting to get you involved in that. And I know that everyone who's part of the playbook and Vincent, we'll also be sending out whether you want to participate in that research. But this is really, really interesting. I think it's a really interesting question to ask about how schools even have the time to think about supporting that concept of theory of mind.
Yeah, and I think to be honest, I think for some schools it's not entirely new that they teach or integrate it into existing classes, critical thinking skills, but I think we probably need to just separate it a bit more so that students realize this is a thing on its own. This is a thing that actually needs to be developed alongside content knowledge, and not just something that's kind of treated as something that's on the periphery of learning.
Fantastic. We had a number of questions that came in over from the past episode 1, and I'll set 2 of these up because I know that Julia, you're going to answer one of the questions from Joachim at International School of Luxembourg, who is really asking around the importance of digital sovereignty. Actually, Julia, we'll pick this up one now. Joachim raised that, especially within Europe, there is an issue around digital sovereignty and essentially what concrete steps can schools take to reduce dependence on US-dominated AI tools like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, beyond well-intentioned but ultimately insufficient advice, such as do not enter personal data, or the acknowledgement that alternative platforms exist but aren't the equivalent quality. So that's the first question, and Julie, you're going to answer that. And there's a second question that I thought would be really useful to bring up, and that's from Dennis Weisner, and he's asked, are there any reliable and efficient AI agents, and this one's for you, Dan, that are worthwhile for teachers right now? So any AI agents that you can think of or any applications around that. But before we get to that second question, Julia, Joachim's asked a very wide ranging, and we could be here for an hour talking about this specific issue around data sovereignty, but can you quickly give us an answer based upon what Joachim was asking? And you're on mute, by the way, Julia.
Sorry, there's quite a lot of background noise, so I muted myself and then I forget that, did it? So yeah, I think this is a really this is a question that it sounds to me comes from quite a mature AI strategy. I think this is quite an advanced part of thinking, and from my experience with schools, we're not that many people are there yet, which I think is brilliant that we're asking this question. So it's you kind of when you're early on in your AI program, you will probably settle on initially on tools like Copilot and Gemini, and that completely makes sense. When it comes to things like concern around hosting in the US, concern around hosting in China. Those tools do offer like in-country hosting, in jurisdiction hosting. And they also provide like familiar environments for people, and it reduces kind of friction when you're introducing these tools to staff. When we're thinking about hosting specifically, there are other EU-based tools. Lumo is one, LongDoc is another, which are on the market and are EU only, and they also are, or EU hosted rather, and they're also very conscious of their GDPR compliance and offer a lot of information about their GDPR and EU AI Act compliance as well, because we have to think about that too. But obviously, they are not up to the same standard as your Gemini, your ChatGPT. Like these are new to the market, and they're startups. Most of the time, they're startup organizations. So of course we are going to have that quality problem. Like there's not really very much that we can say about that apart from the fact that this is the choice. This is a difficult choice that we have to make. But obviously, when we're talking about digital sovereignty, it isn't just about hosting. We do need to think about how things change. Pricing, products can change, regulations can change, availability can change. What happens if something changes and we need to take our data and workflows out of that AI tool without breaking our systems and without breaking everything we've built? So those bigger enterprise tools, Gemini Copilot, you can export some data, but not all of it. So we're right to be thinking about data sovereignty. And that's what I mean about it being like a slightly more mature way of thinking. A lot of us haven't, a lot of our schools just aren't there yet because they're relatively new in their AI journey. There are Joaquin noted some frameworks and partnerships, and are there those out there? They do exist. So there's guidance from places like UNESCO and OECD to help schools manage AI and what they do with AI. There are EU-wide education networks, and that provides some collective leverage when we're talking about what models we want to use. And then there's open source models and agnostic models. So one is called Open Euro LLM, and that means that because it's open source, it's more portable. So you can take everything out of there and put it into a new system. So yeah, it's a massive challenge at this point. It's a really worthwhile question to ask and something to be thinking about, particularly if we're putting large systems and large workflows into our AI. And it is part of, when you're looking at what AI platforms and tools to use, where they're hosted and whether that information is portable is certainly something to be thinking about. So it's not an easy answer, unfortunately.
It's incredibly difficult, and I think that, from what Dan was touching upon earlier, also, there are lots of smaller AI businesses with specific niches to address these specific types of concerns. But will they always be commercially viable? You still have the fundamentals and the fundamental economics around AI that it is, if you're starting off as a new business and with selling an AI product, it is largely unaffordable unless you have deep pockets, and there is only a runway of certain amount of money before your business is going to close down or be bought by someone. Dan, did you have any thoughts on that, or the second question that Dennis asked around efficient AI agents for teachers?
Yeah, and I suppose they probably link quite nicely actually, in that well, I was talking to someone this morning, and he runs a company that helps schools kind of, let's say they want to go fully Microsoft or they want to go fully Google. They help them get that integrated, get them all set up, the licenses, and make sure all the onboarding's good. It's interesting. He was saying there's, over the last 12 months, there's a huge trend now. Whereas we used to see schools being either Microsoft or Google, and fully going down that Google route or fully going down the Microsoft route. In the UK here, it tends to be majority Microsoft with some Google. Over in the US, it's majority Google with some Microsoft, how it's worked out. But they're seeing a huge trend in schools actually going, actually, we want both now. We want, actually, we don't want to be tied in. And I think it's due to the really fast-paced evolution of some of these AI tools, because a school is going, right, well, we're locked into X platform, let's say X is any platform, we're locked into that platform. But this platform over here seems to be running ahead with this amazing AI tool, and now we're missing out. But if we jump over there, then this platform over here could run ahead. So there's a real wanton a mix of places, which obviously picking up on what Julia just said, brings a whole new level of complexity to, well, are we putting all of our data into all of these platforms? Are we just putting a little bit in there, a little and it gets into a really, really complex situation. Saying that, I would say, going picking up on the agent question, the I would say agents are still very, very experimental at the moment. And I would say going back to having a personal account, like I have a personal ChatGPT account, and there's an agent within that. Every now and then I'll try it out to see what it can do, and it's okay. I mean, it literally goes to websites and can complete tasks on websites essentially. Um, I'd say look at where you are. So I work a bit with Microsoft as well, but a lot of the schools I work with, just by chance, want Google guidance. And within Google, there is Google have just released Workspace Studio, which is essentially a little agent that will connect some of those apps that you're already using. So,
Yes, I
for
have seen that.
example, yeah, I set one up the other day, which was if I get an email which is along these lines, could you put it into this folder for me, or could you put it into this spreadsheet, or could you draft this type of reply based on this folder of information within my Google Drive? So, quite basic, and in some levels, especially if when you think an agent, you're thinking the AI doing the job for you, which I think some people do jump to that end conclusion. But is a way to let, I suppose, technical lay people like me and I'm sure many of us on the call, is a way to help us probably put in place the level of workflows that you would might have had to have pay for Zapier or some other
Yeah.
high level tool like that. It's a really nice way just to utilize AI in that way. Again, though, if you're going to be using your email data from school, if you're going to be using files and all that, you want it to be within a really safe zone. So use the platform that you already trust with your data and that you're comfortable with trusting with your data. So it's probably going to be your main platform like Google or Microsoft.
Yeah. So I think again, like what I'm hearing there is stick to stick to the core. Don't bring in, and I like we would be advising the exact same thing. Like don't go and get some random AI agent platform. Stick to what
Yeah.
is core because it is.
Especially, Mark, I think especially when you're dealing with your data, that, and I'm not like I'm part of my of who I am is innovation. I want education to innovate and to really kind of embrace those opportunities. So I'm not saying don't trial other tools, don't play around with other tools, just don't trust them with all of your data. That's probably really key. Doesn't mean you can't create a sandbox environment within the school where students and teachers can try out in a controlled way some amazing new innovative platforms and see what they can do. Just don't stick all your data in them at the same time.
Brilliant. Um, If you have any questions for the next episode, then feel free to add them to the sign up Zoom registration, and we'll do our best to fit them in. Dan, we're now going to have Sabba join. Well, the pre, you and Sabba caught up a few weeks back, and before we bring up the video, would you mind just giving an introduction to some background with Sabba, who she is, her work, and why we thought that having Sabba involved in this project would be really useful and something for people to learn from.
Yeah, Sabba's a good friend of mine. She's based over near LA in California. She used to work from an education point of view for Apple many years ago, and now her work is dedicated to helping school leaders and schools around the world kind of redesign their schools. So she uses a basis of design thinking and design sprints to coach and to help schools within this AI world on how they might need to rethink some of their practices. And yeah, she's a great person, really wise. I went out, I was over that way a few months ago, and we went out for dinner, and I literally just sat and listened to her for like 2 hours, and because she's got so much wisdom and experience. So yeah, hopefully everyone will enjoy this little interview.
Perfect. So I'm just going to pull that up now, and hopefully enjoy.
Sabba, it's amazing to be talking to you again. Let's dive into this topic of AI and leadership. As somebody who writes books on designing schools in a world of AI and works with leaders all over the world, what do you think is the number one thing that leaders need to be aware of right now when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to this changing world?
Oh, wow. So many things. I think just because right now there are so many free tools coming at people, I've been saying that one of the things I think is really important for leaders to consider is the difference between individual use of AI and organizational deployment of not just even AI, like individual use of a technology or a tool versus organizational deployment of a technology and a tool. And I think one of the things with, generative AI in particular is everything started individual, right? It's like there's that chart, right, that shows like how quick adoption was compared to other technologies. And I think when you have a consumer base that is rapidly adopting something, but enterprise spaces already, we're seeing 3 years now, we've got really, really strong enterprise tools that can be deployed in education organizations, businesses, and whatnot. I think you have a lot of bad habits per se, where everyone's like, oh my God, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And that's amazing. But only 10% of those practices from a data privacy, all these different kind of elements can be translated into organizational deployment. And I'll just give you a really good example. We have this like chart of tables where we look at like different areas, but one of them is like purpose, right? If you start with your goal, your vision, and there's an individual says, what can this do for me? So when free things come out, I can go download them, integrate them, play with them. But as an organization, I can't just drop in every free thing that comes my way. Because when I think about purpose, I'm thinking more like, okay, what strategy is this supporting? What outcome is this helping us move towards? And so they're just very different questions you ask that give you a criteria for what you're going to adopt that's going to work for you.
Yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? Especially in education, where it's not just our own data or even adult data; it's the data of our children in the mix there. So I suppose you set up a tension there, then, don't you? Of well, how do leaders get used to these tools? How do they discover these tools? Would you still say they maybe at home play around with them and delve into them, or are they going down a track there where they might be tempted to put those tools that are meant for single users and just bring them into work? Like, how would you resolve that tension?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of like, leaning into like that it's that empathy piece for your own organization before you go designing and deploying something. And I think there's one part of acknowledging that no matter what happens, when somebody has a habit of 3 years using something, they're not just going to leave that tool simply because you gave them an organizational version of something. So I think a lot of people have to become just like better at like reinforcing and reminding, hey, data privacy, PII, these different types of things. Then I think the next big question that comes, and I feel like, again, this might be subjective because maybe your organization is going to be different, but I'll just tell you generally what I see. People can barely handle one thing. So it's amazing that there's 10,000 free tools. I do think you should choose one and go deep, because I think giving too many, I think about sustainability, and you're going to have to just be so savvy as an individual. And if you were already that savvy, you likely wouldn't be in this situation anyways to begin with. So you probably already have a solution. But I say the first question I tell people is look at your existing ecosystem. For example, if you are a Google Workspace for schools and Microsoft is non-existent in your organization, Copilot as an option for you doesn't even really make sense in the beginning, because you're going to have a whole infrastructure ecosystem change. And I think this is another very important thing to consider, is that if your tools cannot connect to your data and your ecosystems, you've got a freelancer. Like if you kind of use that analogy of like, we talk about like AI, not a tool, a teammate, you kind of almost are just bringing a bunch of freelancers that are not going to stay very long. So again, you've got a sustainability issue. Like you talked about the whole teachers and the tension. the biggest tension we know people have is, oh, well, I got trained in this and now he's using this and then it got taken away, right? Or like, oh, it's one more thing now. You're always changing initiatives on me. So that trust is very fragile already. So I just say, just go with whatever your existing ecosystem is, build a skill set. Because if you build a skill set, you can translate it to anything. For example, if you were somebody who was doing like gems or whatever inside Gemini, and now ChatGPT is free and you can do that, great, no problem. You can switch over to GPTs, no problem, right? But if you only learned a tool that didn't have the skills built into it that are transferable, basically, if you're not using one of the OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, let me be so blunt, and you're using something else, you're not developing skills, you're learning how to use a tool. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great applications. I know, like, if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, which we probably did 2 years ago, the Microsoft, Google always kind of felt like they were a bit behind some of the tools who were running ahead and creating things specifically for educators. Feels like they've really caught up over the last 12 months, even the last 6 months, really, in terms of some of the capabilities that they will allow you to do and allow you to do within your existing tools as well. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. And also, you're going to get the added protection of where your data is, who's looking after your data. I suppose I know both of us, we kind of advocate for the fact that because of this technology and because the way the world's going, that actually this might go beyond a bit beyond the tools we use. It's going to we at some point we've got to start addressing systemic change and how do we make an education system that's fit for this crazy world that we're rushing into. What would you say to those leaders who are kind of a bit cautious, really? I just thinking, well, this just feels like a tool. Why are we getting so excited about a chatbot? What actually are the implications on education, apart from the fact that our students can maybe cheat a bit with it? Like, why are we wanting to or why may it seem like we're trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater just because a technology has come along? What would your response be to that line of conversation?
So many things. Okay, let me try to like put this down into like just a couple of quotes. So I think the first one is you don't, and I think this is where, again, I go back to like teams have to have conversations, like what matters to you? I think that's, for a lot of things, I think it's very hard to give people an answer because ultimately a lot of it is just like, what world do you want to see? What values do you really believe in? And how ambitious do you want to be in this moment towards those things, right? It really comes down to that first and foremost. Then the second thing I've been doing lately is, the CEO of Box was together. He was on a Masters of Scale. And he said, oh, I'm so excited. Like, I know everyone thinks it's hard for these young people, but I think this is the best time ever to be a part of this young generation and go in and get a job. He goes, these AI natives, he goes, these are the people you should be bringing in, and they should be bringing in to come into your organization and shake things up. And I was like, okay, like, just even thinking about my experience at Apple, like at 22 years old, you don't walk into Apple and try to shake things up. But that is what they want, though, right? That is kind of what they say, right? Like with innovation, all these things. So one of the questions I ask people is, if you think about being a part of a bureaucratic organization, what skills and mindsets do you need to walk in and shake things up? And we can just put this out here. So if you're listening, go ahead, take a moment, maybe write it down. But you'll never hear somebody come back with a technology. Nobody comes back with PowerPoint. Nobody comes back with like an iPad. Nobody comes back with like ChatGPT. People come back with courage, resilience, communication, team building, like blah, 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 like every single possible skill under the sun that has nothing to do with technology. And so you say, okay, the technology today, though, like if I have an idea for how I might want to shake things up, I can brainstorm that today with these AI tools. Yesterday, 1 of 10 people could do that, if that, right? Today, anybody that has that skill set and knows how to leverage the tools to be like, okay, I have an idea, I see a problem, I see this. This is the barrier for most people. They have an idea, they see a problem, but they don't have the agency to do something about this. So you wrote that great article in Forbes or whatever, and you talk about this all the time. But I think the biggest misconception people have and that they're fixated on is that AI is a tool for knowledge and intelligence. And people don't realize intelligence is not their goal. Their goal is agency. They want these tools to do things, to act, to take initiative. And we see this now so clearly already. I think a lot of the flaw in the line of thinking comes from this is a tool for intelligence and this is about knowledge. And this has nothing to do with any of those things. Even in education, why do we want kids to read, write, and whatever the other one is? It's because we want you to think critically. We want you to create. We want you to do these other things. So I feel like AI tools are kind of in the same category right now.
Yeah, and I think that's when the threat comes as well, isn't it? When a school sees itself as the kind of arbiter of knowledge, and then, oh my goodness, now there's this other thing that seems to have more knowledge, and I think we've got that agency side of things, and I've been really thinking about this recently. I've been, because I'm guilty of this myself. I say it quite a bit, like, how do we want to prepare our students for the future? I say that all the time, and I was in Kazakhstan and I was talking to two 14-year-old boys who had created their own VR app that could help students go into a laboratory and do different experiments aligned to the curriculum. There's an AI voice tutor in there, amazing. And I was really reflecting on it on the flight home, and I was thinking, it's not about preparing students for the future, because I mean that doesn't even make sense as a statement. How can you prepare for a future? Like, we don't even know what especially in today's world, what tomorrow's going to be like. But actually, how do we give them the space to actually make the now? And I think at the heart of that is what you're saying. It's got to be agency, hasn't it? Because if we just keep treating school like a rehearsal for real life, then how do we give them that agency? Agency's got to come from letting them realize that they can impact the world right now.
Absolutely. And I feel like who says it the best, because she's so authentic, is her name Mel? I think I just remember everyone calls her Mel, but the CEO of Canva. Canva did a keynote, I think like 2-3 weeks ago, when they just launched all their new updates. And she goes, we're going from the information age to the imagination age. And I feel like, and then their whole thing was how they're giving people the tools to do this. But when you talk about those kids, that's what they have, right? Imagination. They believe they had an idea. They saw they could do something. They used the technology to do it. This is, I think a lot of people take like one or two examples like that and kind of like label as if all kids are able to do this. Very few people are able to do this. Very few kids, let alone very few adults. However, everyone has the skill. It's just, are you going to be the person who's going to nurture it for them? That's why I go back to the beginning. Like, what are your values? Like, what do you really believe? Because if yes, you really believe that, amazing. The technology is actually there now to support you in implementing this tomorrow, not 5 years from now, not 2 years from now. You can do this tomorrow. It's so accessible, like with a few words. But I find right now the hardest thing is belief in people, that they are willing to change, that they are willing to do things, and belief in your own capacity as a leader to be like, yeah, like people are actually going to be excited. There's a lot of fear. If I make people do too much, if I make people do X, Y, Z, no, I got to give them the first step only because they can't do. And what I have personally found now, I will say over the past 1 year at least, is the more ambitious you are, the more invested your people actually are. The more baseline surface level, the more like non-interested I find people are.
Yeah, I'd quickly searched it. It's Melanie Perkins.
There we go. Everyone calls her Mel. I feel like nobody calls her. So I was like, what's her actual
name? But I think you're right, and I think I feel myself coming back to the control thing as well. That actually, maybe sometimes we just need to get out of the way.
Yeah.
And have trust that if we have nurtured our students in the right way, we have give them autonomy with responsibility, real responsibility as well, not just tokenism, then actually we shouldn't be afraid just to step back and see what happens, to get out of the way, to let go of the control and see what these students are capable of. And now that artificial intelligence can support that when used in the right way, it's like, it kind of goes back to, it reminds me a lot of Sugata Mitra, the guy who, the Indian professor who put the computer in the wall in Calcutta.
Oh, yeah.
And Sugata had this whole methodology, he called it SOLE, SOLE, about allowing students, young students as well, like elementary age kids, to discover and to inquire and to discover what learning themselves and see what they could do themselves. And I remember him doing an experiment a few years ago, before kind of generative AI was mainstream, and he was doing it with just basic Alexa or Google Home hubs, where the teacher would set the students off on a task, and they were allowed to ask the Google Home hub some questions when they needed to, or some pointers. And I feel like now that generative AI can do that times a million, we actually need to be allowing our students to be able to do this in a responsible way and to inquire in a responsible way. Yeah, it's Sabba. If anyone wants to find out more about you, about your book, where can they find you?
I feel like the website is the easiest, designingschools.org. It's always the easiest. Everything's there.
Amazing. Good to chat with you. We'll speak
You
soon.
too, always.
Fantastic. I mean, that is fantastic. I mean, when I first saw this interview, the topics that you've covered off, and the way that Sabba explains, the freelancer model, but at the same time, you've got this tension because the imagination age, you are supporting your students, or there's a need to support your school students to be imaginative with AI, given those students are in Kazakhstan. But at the same time, you've got the tension of how do we protect and don't end up with 100 different AI apps that different people are using, and sticking to a core platform. And I suppose for you, Dan, like, how do you see schools having to manage that tension between trying to coach and create the future ready student in terms of being imaginative with AI and what it can do, whilst balancing okay, only 10, if we go, I think what was the statement, Sabba? One's only about 10% of individual AI practices can be safely translated to the organization. How do you manage that, given the opportunities for what you're trying to encourage your students to do, and then be AI ready?
Yeah, I think by the way, watching myself back is torture. I just had like 15 minutes of torture there. The amount of stuttering I do, and the amount of, oh my goodness. Right. Anyway, I think it's small steps. I think what we were talking about on that recorded interview was a vision that is way down the road at the moment,
Yeah.
for 99.9% of schools. There are some amazing schools, innovative schools that are out there that aren't part of a system, that have a lot more freedom, probably fee-paying schools, so we've got money to throw around a bit, that are experimenting with this stuff and can be an amazing beacon of where we might want to go if they get it right. But I think most 99.9% of schools just you can't just go from where we are now to that. So it's small steps, and I think with small steps we can use the technology that's familiar to us. We can use the technology we know is safe. We can use the technology that's embedded in the systems we already use, and maybe not just. I know there are other tools out there that are safe. Obviously, go through the right procedures and policies to determine what they are. But there are some schools that will give a bit more than maybe your Microsoft or Google platform or whatever it is you're using does at the moment. And seeing what it can do. And I talked about earlier before about a sandbox area. I think every school should have a sandbox area, and I'm not talking about a literal sandbox, although I know some primary schools will have that. I'm talking about an area that is where staff and students can come together and try things out in a safe environment. And if it fails, it fails. If it works, amazing. Let's take it to the next stage. That could be like, I know some schools do it like in an after school club. They'll do it in a lunchtime club, where they'll come together, try things out, and see what happens. Have some conversations around it. But yeah, it's incremental, isn't it? Innovation
Yeah.
is incremental. So, I mean, don't don't obsess over this is where we need to be. You obsess over the next step, otherwise it becomes a cognitive overload. It becomes overwhelming. And what's that next step for most schools? Is probably, I would say, set up that sandbox. Just say, you know what, if you're a teacher, I know you're probably gonna have to give up your lunch, but just say, you know what, in my classroom on a Wednesday lunchtime, we're gonna look into some tools we can get pre-assessed and IT and to sign off on, and we'll have a play around with them, and I'll get some feedback from the students and see if the students like them and if they help the students and take it from there. Because once you start giving those students a voice, it'll nicely lead into, well, how do we solve some of the problems they're bringing up, and how do we help them embrace this if they're enjoying it.
Perfect. Now, I've just shared my screen there with a slide because I think it quite nicely leads on to one thing, an initiative that we are starting in February. So it's free training over three weeks, and I think part of this will be giving you the tools. Well, it is giving you the tools as a school leader, where we provide you with a guest pass to the Nine platform. And if you are doing the reason I say the sandbox, and these leads quite nicely, because if you are sandboxing with different tools, the guest pass access to vendor library will give you a snapshot of the risks, and Julia's could take you through some of the risks in a minute. Also, with the Academy LMS, it's curated online on-demand training around specific components of either you are the school leader who's implementing AI, or you are the person leading. You may not be on the leadership team, but you are leading the school through. So we are going to open registration next week. And then registration closes on the 3rd of February, but then you are committing, it's a free course, but you are committing to join Emma, who's our head of research, once a week for 3 weeks for like an hour where we talk you through the pathway of the things you need to get done. And then you sort of have a Q&A the next session and the next session. But so just look out for that. And the second thing is the student version of Turing Trials is coming out soon, certainly within the next 3 weeks. So you should be looking out for that. Julia, in terms of this friction between paid for free, I want to sort of hand over to you. And based upon the things that we've spoken about today, there's lots of things we've spoken about here, and some of the friction that can come with free versus paid. There is a concept of information density I've got here on my notes from Dan's research around what AI is persuading you to do. And also we've seen the issues of hallucinations, like just this week with West Midlands Police Copilot hallucinating. I'm guessing that was a paid for version. What do you think are the main issues, and how are you working with our clients in terms of overcoming this paid for freelancer model versus the paid, focusing on a core model or core tech stack and sticking with that?
Sure. There's a couple of things in there. So really, we talked a little bit about this in the last session, but in the last webinar. But if a platform's not charging, it's going to be monetizing in other ways. I think we're all pretty familiar with that concept. So those free platforms are going to be usually paid with data. So when we think in data protection terms, there's a huge amount of overlap between AI governance and AI safeguarding and data privacy. When we think about data privacy, we as schools, when we take the data that we've been entrusted with and we entrust it to someone else, we are doing that by instructing them as what's known as a processor. And as a processor, they have to be under certain obligations, and they have to treat that personal data with certain care and within certain kind of ring-fenced purposes. So that's the way it should be done. What we find is when you sign up to free products, they're not legally positioning themselves in that role. So instead of doing what you as a school decide it should happen with that data, they're doing whatever they want with that data. So, and this, like going back to sort of Sabba's point in that video there, this applies to how one staff member uses that tool, as well as an approved tool that's been made available organisationally throughout the school. So we have to be thinking about how they are using that data, and if that tool is going to use it however they want, it's going to be going into their training model, or how they are instructed by us as an individual. We have to think about that data being put into our care and who we are going to entrust it to.
Perfect. So in Dan's example of the sandbox, because in the sandbox, like the kids may be going out and choosing their own tools because they're free, and the school, the teachers may be doing that and doing it free. So how do you overcome that friction, and how do you responsibly understand what the risks are? Because you'll want to play around with free accounts. You want to do that because it is a continuum, as Dan quite rightly pointed out. But how do you responsibly understand what those risks are so you can manage those, and you're not putting your students in danger, right? Or you're not, inadvertently disclosing personal data that shouldn't be disclosed because you weren't aware of it. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So first of all, I mean, slightly more bureaucratic version is that you would do an assessment before you use these tools, right? Dan referred to it there, tools that are available to have already been approved by certain departments at school. So doing what we would refer to as a vendor assessment is important before you start, especially letting students access a tool. So I'm going to quickly share my screen now, if I can find the right window, which I can't. There it is. I showed this in our last session. We have the vendor library, which is our pre-templated vendor assessment, so you can download and tailor to your own use of a vendor in the school. What this does is it highlights where we've identified risks and issues. So this would kind of be your first port of call, as it were, and this will give you an overview of what risks and issues there might be associated with that tool. I've picked Gemini. This is obviously a very big one. You'd probably be doing this with smaller, lesser known tools if you were using that kind of sandbox environment that Dan mentioned. But what we do is we talk about some of these safeguarding risks as well, things like persuasive design and other concerns that come up when you're using artificial intelligence. So you mentioned there things like hallucinations. So we talk about bias and inaccuracies that might come up. We talk about how that could affect students and staff in an educational environment. What does that mean if operational staff are using these tools? What does it mean if students are using these tools? Thinking about inappropriate and distressing content as well. So these are summaries. The detail, how we've come to these conclusions, is all in the assessment pre this section. But this is kind of our overview of what we found having done this assessment. And one of the other things, as well as hallucinations, is over-reliance. And I've said this before in other various situations, is that if you've got AI being used by the maths department, by the languages department, by the English department, and you've got a student in each of those classes, there's a huge amount of AI that they're going to be using. So it's understanding how that looks across the whole school as well, and that we're not encouraging or enabling any kind of over-reliance on AI too. We need to make sure, obviously, I'm sure this is on top of everyone's minds, but in managing and encouraging independent thinking and independent analysis, and not having an overuse of AI which could impair cognitive skills. And that goes for us as adults as well. If we are using it operationally as teachers, then we need to be thinking that we're not kind of getting into a position where we're over-relying on it. So inaccuracies, hallucinations, things like that, the core thing that we have to think about, that we have to have implemented, is that human in the loop. There always has to be somebody checking. And as with the example of the West Midlands Police, you can't just take what AI says and stick it out into whatever output you have. It has to be reviewed. It has to be critically interrogated. And that would be kind of the biggest thing. So yeah, kind of tying these things together. Our vendor assessment does highlight these risks, and it also gives you some practical steps that you can take to mitigate them as well. So we have a kind of a list in here. It'll load, shouldn't have come out of that window, of things that you can look at doing. And these are generally quite practical, and thinking about policy, acceptable use, that kind of thing as well. So yes, the sandbox is a brilliant idea. You'd probably want to have some guardrails around how that works, what tools can be used in that sandbox, and how you're going to use them, especially when it comes to students.
Perfect, thanks, Julia. And if you're interested to learn more around what Julia just showed you there, feel free to get in touch with us, and one of the team, including Julia, would be more than happy to take you through the vendor platform. I want to wrap things up, Dan, with next week we've got BET 2026 around the corner, one of, if not the largest edtech show in the world. and both I'll be there and you'll be there. And I just wanted you to give what your AI is featuring heavily as a cybersecurity, and there'll be lots of things happening in the show, but also outside the show. What are you looking forward to in terms of doing or seeing, or what would you encourage people to engage with at Bet next week?
Yeah, I think Bet, if you come to Bet without thinking about it, you will be overwhelmed. You might be frustrated. You might get confused. It's amazing. You literally walk onto a floor and there are thousands and thousands of companies with all singing, all dancing, exhibition stands, giving away merchandise. Amazing people who really care about the future of education. However, and I was thinking about this yesterday. I think, and it kind of comes back. I was building on a framework for the decision making kind of thing I was talking about earlier, and I think if you're going to go to Bet, you've got to come with your priorities. You've got to come with what is the strategic priority that we are wanting to be supported by coming to a place like this, and then you need to be met with an evidence-based solution. And I think once a clear priority coming together with an evidence-based solution that's the dream. If you come with a priority and you quickly realize that some of the solutions you're having conversations with people about are not evidence-backed, it's more fancy marketing, then it's going to build frustration. If you come with no priorities and you're suddenly met with lots of amazing tools that's backed up with lots of evidence, you're going to be overwhelmed because you're going to be like, I want all of them. I want all of them. How can we integrate them all? If you come not prepared without that clear priority and you're met with lots of fuzzy marketing terms about what this AI tool can do, it's going to be absolute chaos. You're not going to really get anything from it. So I think have clear priorities before you go and search for the evidence-backed solutions. And I think that's the recipe for getting it right when going to Bet, especially if you're looking to find a solution.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's all we have for this month's session of the AI Educator. I think that's or AI Playbook, should I say. I think it's been really interesting. What's really hit home for me is Sabba's interview with Dan and the freelancer model, and having a single tech stack is your primary starting point. Next month's we don't know the content of next month's playbook yet because we haven't gone through the month, but really looking forward to it. When you are invited to attend, please feel free to put all the questions that you have. Julia, I really appreciate your contribution this month. Really appreciate you taking us through free versus paid. And thanks again, Dan. Thanks again, for everything that you are doing to enlighten us around what is important and what we should be considering. And thank you for everyone else attending. So look forward to seeing everyone next month, and look out for the registration for the free training that is going to take place next week. So all the best. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.